yeah, last session of Dash. We're not going to be talking about an internal development platform necessarily. We're going to be talking about an internal something platform. A little bit of everything. Like, as we just heard, last session of the day, you made it through Dash. And that's hard, right? Like, it's 2 days of amazing content. Your mind is probably blown several times over. And other than the on-call screen that we saw during the keynote, you're here, so that means you weren't on call, which means you didn't have to leave. You didn't have to, excuse yourself from the one session you really wanted to see because nothing happened until something did happen. We skipped the sound on this one because I know there's certain apps that have a sound that triggers PTSD.
Can be very triggering.
Page-triggered stress disorders, as we all know. And you have that moment where you get this page like, well, that represents about 95% of our company's software, this one vulnerability. And we're not going to name languages because it's not important. This can work for all of them. Quick show of hands, if you were at the fireside yesterday for improving software delivery and developer experience. There we go. This is basically the implementation version of that talk, which was very great because it is a problem that we all have. And so imagine you get that ping. Obviously, PTSD is triggered, and you're going to go for your next flat white with an extra shot, which makes it a Melbourne Magic. Does not go well with cake because you don't have the time for that. And we have a problem. On-call is never fun. No matter how cool the sound is or how muted the sound is, it's a disruption. Not only takes you away from Dash, it changes your day. But more importantly, on-call always comes with a mission. You never get that point where you get pinged and the day gets simple. Because once you get pinged, the day just got, a lot worse. Your physician will down the road complain about the coffee you consumed. It's like nobody's really grateful, right? People up top, unhappy that there's a page. Your physician, unhappy that you're still consuming way too much of all the substances you shouldn't have. You yourself wanted to be at a Dash talk. I mean, I get that. It sucks. You get tasked with a new time-sensitive mission, and we're going to figure out what that is. And so, show of hands, who here has ever been on call or is on call in their current role? Beautiful. I'm so sorry. So, imagine you have a mission like this. You have a vulnerability in a language that your company is using widely, very widely. And you need to identify every on-call engineer of every service that you run publicly. Can you do that at this point? Do you have a way of figuring out, these are the people I should be talking to, so I can go back to enjoying Dash, or not? And if you answer no with that, on that question, it's totally fine. At HashiCorp, of course, like many other companies, we have rotations of engineers that we can ping for this. They act as on-call subject matter experts. We can ping them via Slack. We can harass them via email, by which I mean inform, but let's be honest, it's on-call, so it's harassment. And these engineers are tasked with solving the critical issues of their service. But they're not necessarily site reliability engineers by trade or training. They might have some skills in that area, they might find it interesting to do, but they're not an SRE or equipped to have access to all the SRE tooling. But what they are, though, is the group of people is most qualified to help with answering a question like that. So let's talk about impact. And here's the worst part about this vulnerability. Just got posted on this orange side. Your CEO heard about it. Your CEO was an engineer. They want to help. Bad news aside, or good intentions, I guess, however you want to call it. As SREs, it is our job to figure out how to identify the right people, figure out which product, which service, and team is impacted, and how we muster a company-wide response, and is it even needed to be company-wide? Your first feeling might be, well, 100% of people are affected. It's not untrue, but we're here to be stress-free. I'm going to give you 5% off immediately because we still have 4 teams that are on Ruby on Rails and TypeScript. There's different critical vulnerabilities, but at least they're not affected by this one. And 95 is way better. I don't like 3 digits, except when it's for uptime, and we all know that's a lie anyway. So, only version 1.5 of Flare-Lang is affected. And that's good. So we can further downscope the impact because not all of our teams are on 1.5. So let's throw out another 32%. Doing math in my head because I'm not seeing the exact numbers here. It rounds up to 100, I promise you, as all stats do. Just imagine the last part is a little bit fudged, but it is 100. And now really the question is, 63%, how do we get to who those people are and who I can ping?
Maybe a service catalog? Is that an option?
I don't know. Is a service catalog enough for this? I think we need more than just service information. And it would be good to have that information before we have that outage, right? Scrambling to figure out where the fire extinguisher is when the fire is ongoing. You should definitely be scrambling for it. But it's nicer if you know that you can just go into that corner over there, open that box, and grab the fire extinguisher.
Yeah, so as Kerim said, we've got to find a way to reach that 63%. That's our mission as SREs a lot of the time is figuring out when you have a problem you've heard of, where is the thing, what services are affected. You might be looking around in GitHub for what microservices or where your monoliths are, trying to look at them and say, is this affected, is that affected? And you might be also, at the time, right, this is time sensitive, you're trying to figure out what team owns that thing, what is their on-call, maybe they have a funny name, maybe they're, I was on a team once called Jaguar Shark, no one could find us for on-call, it was great. But I think, you're trying to figure out, are they on call? How do I even find this 63%? That's definitely difficult. And then once you find them, there's a whole other set of things you need to do, right? You need to explain the vulnerability to them. Maybe you've talked to 10 other teams and this is the 11th. And so you kind of know what to say about how to remediate it. And if it's possible, you might even want to give them an easy way to go back and see that green checkbox that says they're good now. I've been lucky not to receive that kind of call at a conference like Dash, but I definitely, as a principal SRE at HashiCorp, have had that challenge. And at HashiCorp, we are really into declarative configuration. You've probably heard of Terraform. We're into automating as much as possible for our operations and using APIs for everything. And so it won't surprise you that we also took that kind of approach with this problem of dealing with this kind of vulnerability.
So when you call your team Jaguar Shark, is that the way to avoid being paged always?
No, I mean, it was also fun, but it helped.
Now we all love code. Terraform has a random pet name generator. You should definitely use that for your on-call teams. It's great.
So Kerim, in your role, I know as me as an SRE, that's something I get asked all the time, right, is to go chase this kind of question. But as a developer advocate, are there emergencies like that for you too? I feel like there's more developer relations emergencies than people think.
It definitely is. Not what we're talking about today because we want to figure out services. But for me, I want to have data on things that our organization does. I like what our SREs do, which is why we talk together about these topics, because I think they have cool practices, they have best practices that we can bring to other people. So for me, I want to have a database or a service or a platform, whatever, that gives me information like this. Who's running the latest release of Nomad? Are they using the new features that we put into that release? Is there something that we can extract from their knowledge, from their learnings over the past few months to bring to our audience? Tell interesting stories, right? Get people inspired to use the features, but also learn something myself. I mean, we're all engineers. We like doing that. So yeah, for me, my mission is really bring that knowledge to the people through conferences, talks, projects I work on, and go from there. And so, I mean, this is really simple, right? We're engineers. So going from the 63% is really a matter of popping up your editor and we write some code. We're engineers. Start with a for loop. I mean, you usually have 3 services. Let's be honest, you don't like hard code them because names never change. We know that. And we have a little font issue here, I noticed, but the identify affected services is 1 line up, I promise you that, because we Go formatted the code beforehand. And identify affected services, 3 words, super simple, right? To write, not to build. That was rather complex. As you might guess, any company that runs a sufficiently complex infrastructure, multi-cloud, multi-continent, is mostly multi-headache and multi-data source. We have a lot of inputs that we need to consider. Like a lot. But I think the better part here, instead of thinking of it as a affected team and affected people and who to ping, we should think about it like, what data do we have? What data can we use? And Martin alluded to that a little bit earlier. To be super clear, this is not a service catalog. We're not doing a product announcement. This is not something that will be on GitHub later on. We're going to teach you something. And then hopefully you build something so we don't have to keep building this. If you don't have any relevant data and you have this empty box, you have nothing. It's not a platform. It's not something that's useful. So I want to dive a little bit into our data strategy and figure out what we can do here. And so, of course, we have code. So first thing we can be looking at is who writes code, what kind of code do they write, at what time does it come in, how do the tags look like, are we closing the right tickets left and right, or GitHub issues. There's a lot. Code owner files, PR templates, even branch protections, like everything that tells us something about the state of our software. And this is good. We wanted all kinds of data, so for that we have a GitHub app that collects this stuff. Now, of course, let me see if we can go on. There we go. Even the best software, none written by Martin, of course, but other people, has incidents. Martin is the only person I know who writes incident-free software, but he does write software to handle incidents, which is beautiful. So that's really the first place we look at, because an incident will tell you something about the team health. Are we seeing the same incident pop up again? How's the service performing? Are we seeing outages every time we run backups or some other situation? Is the product health affected? Not just product as in like Terraform or Vault, but internal products we might be offering or external facing products like our cloud services. And this is stuff that we can talk about for hours, but to give you an idea, of course, we collect different sources. Of course, plenty of stuff in Datadog, monitors, traces, everything, dashboards. We had a really nice session earlier where I think Kelly was the speaker's name, explained how to do detection as code and basically Datadog as code. Terraform has been really nice for that kind of thing. And so we bring in a few more things, not just team health in terms of incidents, like how disrupted was your sleep, because that will have an effect, but also what's the team structure? Are we talking 2-people teams or are we talking 20-people teams? Because that defines how you respond to incidents. Other heuristics and groupings, we call them partitions in the sense that this might be a GDPR compliant or GDPR relevant service. This might be a payment service, things like that. Quick overview, there's many more of these things, but to give you a little bit more of a visual, I'm going to show you one screenshot, and I'm going to ask Martin to talk it through.
Yeah, so you saw on some of those previous slides that we sort of took a step back and looked at what data we could collect. And so this screenshot kind of shows you some of those things that we're now collecting about services. And we're not quite sure exactly at the point that we were building this what that was going to lead to, but you can see, we are collecting data from PagerDuty. So you have like information about PagerDuty provides a bunch of really nice statistics about when somebody's interrupted, whether it's business hours or after hours. You could see that there's a bunch of data we collected from Datadog. So we actually figure out like what dashboards correspond to this service, what synthetic monitors, any artifact in Datadog we were kind of looking for to give you a place to go to this service and say, all right, what's everything in Datadog related to it? There's also some summary here where we asked folks, I think it was just the previous one, was about what teams are telling us about their services for data. So it was like, is there customer data in this service? Tell us a little bit more about what data is in there. So you can see some of that. Also, if the service pulls data from somewhere. So we're really just collecting all this information. We're not even sure everything we're going to do with it yet. But we also started to see some places where we could at least tell people what we think is the best practice for a service. So you could see some of those here, like we hoped. We think you probably need a code owners, right? So that's an example of something where we are really looking to see what team owns this service, and the code owners is a way we can do that. There's a whole list here. I won't go through all of them, but we have ones from everything from security to operational things. Does it have an SLO? Is it using our standards for an SLO, for example, in Datadog? So yeah, we started to sort of build these views of all this data we had. And then life got more interesting. As we went along, we realized, you can see there's some informational ones too. So there's some ones where we realized, okay, is Dependabot updated, enabled in this repository, right? So it started to get from things we definitely know should be true to things that maybe a team had a question about. Maybe the security team was really interested in whether a security scanner for GitHub was enabled for every repo. So yeah, it started to get even more interesting with all this data.
There's a lot of data. And so that brings you to really the first question every engineer should be asking themselves is, should we be building this or should we just be buying it, right? We wanted to write a fancy for loop, build a UI around it, and then do something with it. Figure out how SRE can answer questions like, who should we ping, and make sense of that big list. These are a lot of data sources. A lot of data sources to answer the one simple question. And so if we classify that data a little bit, you'll notice that there's still a lot. We're oversimplifying this because we're talking, what's the current count? Just shy of 100 data sources that we are ingressing?
Oh yeah, that's about right, I think. Yeah.
It's too much.
Almost 100.
And it's hard to correlate. But if you know Datadog, then correlation is important. I mean, I remember my first dashboard where I could see like lots of CPU requests on one side and slow response times on the other for the end users. And then realizing that the database was also not happy, and you can finally see the patterns. You can see what's going on. And of course, there's some magic that happens there, and algorithms and things that you have to figure out. But you still have to extract something good from this. And as Notorious B.I.G. said, more data, more problems. But we're here to have a positive mindset. More data is just more use cases. We had a lot of use cases. We have all this data that basically helps us understand what the company is like, how we live and breathe software. We've begun to switch from thinking about things like, is our software dependency out of date, as being the only question to ask, to more importantly, how often do teams across the company keep their dependencies up to date? Because that really is what matters. It doesn't matter that your team skipped out on approving all the Dependabot requests on Monday. It matters if everyone does it. It's all about having those different layers making sense. And so there's a lot of opportunity here. So of course, the only right thing to do for something like that is ask ChatGPT to describe what we're building. Give you the input. Here's what we're doing. Can you tell us what this is? And so we got this, collection of tools, services, infrastructure components that help developers manage the entire application lifecycle. That sounds like an internal developer platform. Citation needed. Of course, there was not a single source quoted, but you know what? It's not what we're doing. We're not here to just help developers. Cancel my subscription, not worth it. So we went back to mapping the problem. And so we had a lot of them.
Yeah, so as Kerim alluded to here, we sort of looked at it and said, well, it could be an internal developer platform, right? We're collecting all this data. But then the example we started with at the beginning really is focused on something different than maybe what an internal developer platform would be focused on. That's more of an SRE use case, is show me everything across the company where this is happening, not show me the developer that owns these particular services. And so, yeah, we have some questions on here that started to come up, and some of them fit into the developer platform use case and some don't, right? So, as an SRE at HashiCorp, one question I have is like, across all the services, show me all the ones that have SLOs in Datadog and show me which ones are failing their SLOs or which ones are at risk or which ones recently recovered, right? And I don't think that an internal developer platform is necessarily looking at that use case. Developers on their teams, for example, know who's on call already, but me as an SRE wanting to page a bunch of people to resolve the example incident and vulnerability we started with is more of an SRE use case. And the data for who's on call is much more dynamic. And so these are some of the questions you see on the slide here that we started coming up with. That maybe some are internal developer use cases, but we realized we might actually be building something that's more than that or has some other things in it too. This slide kind of talks about some of the personas we started to come up with, right? And so instead of just collecting all this data, people are starting to come to us and ask for things, right? And we're like, all right, so security is asking for some things. That SLO example for SRE is there. There's also some governance ones that are coming up. And so really we started to see that this platform we were building was sort of like assigning actions for different personas that want to do things and leverage this data. And so we had some other design principles for the platform too that I think helped us. And
most important being have a team called Jaguar Shark,
right,
so you don't get paged.
I didn't tell Kerim that example before we got on stage. That's one of my favorite team names I've ever been on. Yeah, do you want to advance a little bit here? So some of the other design principles were, we really wanted it to be an open platform. And so we actually made it so anybody in the company could come and submit data to it. We made it fairly generic in that way. We could also made it so that anybody can submit an opinion about data that's already in there, for example. And you could even come and get data out of it, right? We started to discover very quickly that even, for example, non-technical roles wanted to sometimes ask a question about a bunch of services at HashiCorp. But we did have some opinions, and so you see those on the right. We knew that if the data got too old, it would be kind of a weird experience for folks. That's the first thing I do as an engineer when I use a new system is hit reload and see if it's in there now, right? So we knew, for example, that would be critical, so the data expires. We also gave some little bit of safeguards in terms of schema. For example, as Kerim showed on that slide about GitHub, we actually do ingest data from GitHub, but I don't want to ingest the entire Git history of a repository. That's not my goal with this platform, and so that's an example of something where we were like, don't put all of that in there, please. Yeah, and we also provide a couple of things that we know that teams probably want to know, even if I'm writing a check or evaluating some data. I might, for example, one of those is we have a really popular shared library internally. And I bet some teams are going to want to know what version that is, regardless of what their use case is for this platform. So those are some of the other guardrails we put in place.
Or if you're the owner of that library and everyone ends up using it and you then get pinged that, hey, we noticed a bug in your library. Very uncomfortable because you never built it for anyone else.
So yeah, as we started to do this, and as Kerim alluded to before, this became maybe more than one kind of platform, and we weren't really sure at the beginning what we were doing when we dumped all of this data regularly into this system. But we have a much better sense of requirements now for it. As you can see, we kind of put like some of the personas and what kinds of things people wanted out of it. But none of these are still a service catalog, which is kind of interesting because that's where we started thinking about just a list of services as an SRE. Sometimes I want to just loop over a list of services. So we started to look at it as these three sort of major groupings of personas. And now at HashiCorp, we're actually talking about, for each of these, do we want to build them? So, the internal developer platform use cases we've learned a lot about, and I think we probably want to do that. But now we have a lot more focus on what that is and what those use cases are from that big list that you saw earlier. And likewise for the other two, as an SRE, I want a lot of capabilities in a platform that span across a lot of services or teams. And we also see that sometimes with this like third area here is sometimes people want to know, what do people at HashiCorp do when they run Nomad? Remember that example Kerim gave about wanting to tell our customers how to run Nomad and what best practices there are. Kerim can actually go ask this platform, what are the people that are using our container orchestrator actually doing? I mean, that's a really useful use case for you.
It 100% is. And of course, what's better than one greenfield project that you get to decide everything on 3? I'm kidding. So we went from ingesting a bunch of data on the left side that basically blew our mind because nobody uses the same schema, to building a database and then discovering something that it could tell us about how we're doing, which really is important. And so if there's nothing you take away from this, take away this one thing. Gamification works. Ask your airline, ask your any loyalty program. So we put in quality scores. You saw it in the screenshot earlier. The email service has a score of 94. My projects are falsely identified as an 86. Is clearly a bug. But it helps because as an engineer, I want to have 100%, right? I want to make sure that whoever looks at my service, whoever uses my service, has all the tools they need to figure out how to ping me when things go wrong or when they need new features, which is more likely. So it brings us this beautiful network effect of software developers, software engineers, we're artisans, right? We craft stuff by hand. There's a lot of pride in our work. We don't use the same tools as craftsmen did 100 years ago. Well, I mean, we still use hammers for everything, but there's a lot of pride in what we do. There's a lot of dedication to it. You don't just stop coding because it's the end of the day. Your brain keeps going. And so, of course, when I see a score that's not 100%, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep making it more interesting. And then have a talk with my physician about coffee use, but that's okay. And it brings us to a couple of emerging opportunities. When your services perform better, you as an organization benefit. If I don't get disrupted or if Martin doesn't get disrupted in his sleep because a service doesn't have an outage, it's good for Martin, it's good for his team, it's good for the company. And that really brought us to this one point. It's like, so we have all this data on the left. We basically have this funnel that keeps getting closer to that one point of like, what does better service health mean? And instead of just comparing a lot of data and trying to do something really smart with it, what we really learned is that we redefined a couple of things. We redefined the truth of something core to us, which is what HashiCorp defines as a service. You can replace HashiCorp with your company name here. What we define as a service is not what Datadog defines as a service. It's not what Nomad or Kubernetes defines as a service. It is not what the Oxford Dictionary defines as a service. It is very much a representation of who we are as a company, how we operate. And we didn't have that definition before. That makes it hard, right? When you don't know what the problem is, then you can't solve it.
Yeah, so it's a really important point. We kind of, as Kerim said, we were really discovering who we are as a company as we pulled all of this data together. And And it was quite a revelation, right? That where suddenly what it means to run a service at HashiCorp is like quantified, and we can go look at it and make decisions about it, or even just describe it. But there were a lot of challenges while that was happening too. And so there's some of the challenges we discovered. Some of them I've already mentioned, but you know, I didn't want to get into all of them. I think I could probably do a blog post or a whole talk on just like one of these up here. But some of the things that came out just in summary were that we have a much better idea now of how to drive adoption of something we want across the company, right? One of the examples for this platform is that people started to consume the data in additional systems, and that was actually a driver. The score Kerim mentioned was also a driver. We're actually studying now whether the score correlates with reliability or not. Like, is your SLA higher if you score better in some of the things we showed you before? We also could see the edges of a team a lot better, or a service a lot better. So we can see if there are services that maybe we're not giving the level of support that we need. And we can actually see that reflected in the fact that, you know, a particular team or service is not getting dependency updates, or maybe has really unhealthy on-call. And as SREs, I can go approach that team and figure out how to help, right? We also saw sometimes that there were capabilities we're missing. So there's actually people that were looking at this platform, you know, thinking about, can I make this an enterprise service bus? Can I listen to the data changing on this platform and do something with it? So people were kind of like remixing this data for all kinds of use cases where it really did show us, oh wow, this is a gap in something that our engineering teams can't do today.
Your product org would absolutely love taking everything that's an issue here and immediately pumping it into Jira and turning it into roadmap features.
Yeah, so again, just we started out with wanting to write that for loop, and now we're like learning things about ourselves, right? It's like, it's therapeutic. And hopefully you have a little bit of a sense of the kinds of things that we've built, and sort of how we went from, let's put all this service data, or all of this data, into one place, including really dynamic data, because it's not a service catalog. And yeah, some of the things that we sort of learned, both about our requirements for these different personas we showed you before, but also about HashiCorp in the process. So let's cover a few more forward-looking things we want to do. Yeah, so we want more automation, right? We want to make it easier to interact with our systems. I'd love to feed some of this platform data into AI. Every presentation has to mention AI. We're here, right?
7 times, and we're
Yep,
only at 5.
7, okay, you're counting. Understanding also, just there's still a lot more we could do with telling people about what HashiCorp does, right? If you're the SVP of engineering and you want to know what is our average response time to something, or how many teams have a monitor that's not notifying PagerDuty but is going off. We have all kinds of interesting summarization and questions we could answer. They're almost like business intelligence for engineering questions. There's also some more targeted use cases like the one up there. I get to work on PCI compliance sometimes. So sometimes I use this platform to make sure that the services I know need to be compliant do certain things. And then there's all those wide use cases I mentioned before that are kind of like a reliability data platform. We're actually discovering use cases that we want to implement in the future around like studying our reliability against things that normally our product managers would only look at for product metrics, right? So I might want to say, if the reliability of this service went down, did this adoption funnel also go down? This is like data that no one was looking at before with such ease that now this platform has. So yeah, these are some just even more specific examples of things we're looking at now, which is, for example, the one I mentioned before about how does it impact our adoption, but what other things, you know, even if we're within our SLO budget, what other things are happening to a service? Do teams have, for example, higher on-call fatigue when they're within their SLO, but it's dropping? There's all kinds of interesting sort of research questions here. Does more data in there equate to more a higher quality service when it comes to reliability? do more customers use some product if it scores better in our internal platform of best practices for how to deliver reliable services that people want to use? And there are internal developer platform use cases too. I know we keep saying it's not that, but are developers happy? Some of the things we can tell in here are again, PagerDuty data, GitHub data. Are developers, not happy when a PR takes over 24 hours to get reviewed, and that affects the overall reliability? I would love to make that case to our leadership and say, you need to invest in these engineering practices because it actually affects customers really directly, and we have the data to show. So lots of interesting questions there. I think there might be...
It's been 6 hours and I'm at a conference. I can't review your code right now.
Exactly. And then there's does the company care if a dependency is flaky across a lot of services, right? We can also do some interesting things here for developer productivity use cases. Or how are operators behaving on services? There's really just so much rich data here. One thing we want to do with more services is add more nines, right? That's the name of the game, is to make them more reliable as an SRE. But sometimes there are things we don't even know about that we can do to support teams so that they can be more reliable, right? Maybe it's an engineering-wide project to replace a flaky dependency so that all the services can achieve an extra 9 or half a 9 or something like that.
Small investments that affect the whole organization.
Yeah, it's funny. So this is kind of where we ended up, and I know we've kind of mentioned this already, but there is an internal developer platform kind of use case. There's a reliability data platform, is what I'm calling it, use case. And this service intelligence one, which is like, tell us about ourselves. And so that's kind of where we ended up.
Which really changes our mission to a goal, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. Honestly, there's so much more to do now that we know we have these like 3 distinct areas and all of these examples. So I think figuring out how to do all of those is probably our next big challenge, is which ones to invest in and which ones to invest in first. And should we support some of the more exotic use cases, like using this data platform for teams to listen to events and do their own provisioning? Should it actually play a role in the service lifecycle or even the deploy lifecycle of shipping code? Should we make a PR fail a check if the service score is really low in this platform? There's so much more to figure out. I'm an SRE, so the things I want to definitely use it for are reliability related, and around those sort of core focus areas for the company. But I'm also just really excited about all the data that now we can study and look at just correlations and things we didn't have before. There's so many things I think we do as engineers that we just think are probably the right thing to do, whether it's getting people on call for their code or how we do monitoring, that are just kind of industry best practices. But now we could actually say the data backs up that that's the right thing to do or not. So I'm pretty excited about that.
So as you are getting ready to go to the closing reception, take this thought with you. Replace HashiCorp with your company name. Think about the thing that is the definition you would give to the services your company runs. Doesn't matter if you're an IC just tasked with making sure your GitHub pipelines run, or if you're on a CISO level. This is a question you can ask yourself at any level of your career, and you should ask this question. If your team isn't asking that question, ask it together. There's a lot to learn from this. This is not career-driven development, though it will push your career forward to be able to answer this with a clear statement, with a clear document. But it is something that will help you. It helped us, and we believe that it could help everyone.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you so much. Thank you. Got a blog post coming on this because there's only so many words you can put in a slide and on a slide, and we'll take about one question if you're quick.
Yes, if you have any questions, you can get up and use one of the mics on the aisles.
The trick is to always blow people's minds so they don't ask questions.
Yes.
I think we're standing between them and the food
Yeah,
downstairs.
there is a question over there. Can you please, for the recording, use the mic, please?
How long this journey took from start to here?
Yeah, I would say like maybe it's probably been about 2 years. I mean, I think I was kind of joking. I think we really did at first think like nothing in here is going to be like its own source of truth. It's only going to be an aggregate of data from other places. And I'd say like maybe 9 or 10 months in, we started to realize that we're like creating truth just by having the like cross section of all the systems and the view of a service across all of them. We actually had our own sort of source of truth. And that was, so like about a year in, we started to realize that. And then that second year, I would say, is a bunch of the use cases sort of you saw up there that were more elaborate.
The third year is when we make the UI pretty.
Good. Any other questions? I actually have a question, if I may. For me, I've loved it. I think this is super interesting. So thanks for sharing. So with all those data sources, like I think you mentioned over 100, is there any data source that you thought it was going to be super useful and turned out not to be that useful, and the other way around, like something like you were like, we have this data, let's pull it in, and then it was turned out to be extremely useful?
That's a good one.
Trying to think of ones. There were definitely ones that were surprises. I mean, one cool thing about ingesting this data ourselves was that look, every sort of company has things that only they do, right? And so there's like HashiCorp isms that surprised us that we were able to really take that like a generic tool wouldn't be able to interpret. And so like one example that's something that really surprised me was that we thought we would kind of need some sort of HR or like team structure, HR data system to tell us about teams and employees. But it actually turns out that if there's one thing HashiCorp's really good at, it's like following a standard and doing something a very specific way. You see this with a lot of our products. And it turns out that we could almost guess the team Slack channels and email addresses without ingesting much data because they were so consistent. And so that was like one that surprised us, where we thought, oh, you know, I feel like when you integrate with some of these like billing and HR systems at your company, you think it's going to take forever and you're going to have to come and explain what an SRE is and what you want to do with all this data and why. And yeah, that one ended up really easy and we didn't actually have to do that much. So that's one that surprised me.
Cool. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
You.
Thank you all.